coming to next question. That is question number 7. So let me read the question once. Question is on Washington Consensus. The Washington Consensus were far from optimal for transitional economies. In this backdrop, discuss the change of direction towards post-Washington Consensus. Alright, so the Washington Consensus were far from optimal for transitional economies. In backdrop of this, discuss the change of direction towards post-Washington Consensus. We need to discuss the change of direction towards post-Washington Consensus. So, question is on what was expected in Washington Consensus. So, what is Washington Consensus? What are the principles or what are the outcomes after this particular 1991? Next point is how these principles are the advocates of the principles are far from transitional economies, the realities of transitional economies. Alright, and what is a change in direction towards post-Washington Consensus within the transitional economies? So what kind of change or what kind of direction of change is seen in transitional economies after Washington Consensus? Now, very first thing we should understand, we should explain what is Washington Consensus is. Alright, so that is what the most important element is. Alright, so first of all, we need to understand what is this Washington Consensus, right? Alright, so what is this Washington Consensus? So this term was used in 1989. Alright, simply this Washington Consensus propagates the idea of free market economies. Free market economy. Simply, even if you don't have any idea about what is Washington Consensus, then as by the name of Washington, you can simply imagine that it is something about LPG. It is something about free market economies. There is nothing wrong. Alright. So if you have if you can think common sensely, you will get the answer. Even without any specific preparation, right? You can identify this. So Washington Consensus is all about, propagating the idea of free market economies. Alright. Then when we talk about free market economies, immediately the 10 commandments of NPM. Alright. So then think about NPM, what NPM propagates, right? What are the futures of NPM? What are the goals of NPM? What is the role of state according to NPM, according to the advocates of NPM, right? So it was in 1988. It was in 1988. That is after second Minnebrook Conference, right? As well as after the book of Ted Gabler and David Osborne, right? This word of NPM got popularized by Christopher Hood. Alright, so what was the role of state according to NPM? right? And what are the principles of NPM? We have 10 principles. So you can use these 10 principles. Simply the LPG, right? Liberalization, privatization, globalization, trade protection, market protection, coming with an what you call legal mechanism to protect the what you call copyrights or patent rights, right? It is about protecting the patents, right? So all these are a part of Washington Consensus. All right. So now this Washington Consensus was supported by the international financial institutions like IMF, World Bank, and they are being actively advocated and implemented by developed countries like US, the European countries. So for them it is more beneficial. These principles are more workable and more beneficial for developed countries. But coming to developing countries, that is transitional economies. So question revolves around this element of transitional economies. So to what extent the transitional economies can follow these principles of Washington Consensus, right? And if these principles are followed, what is the direction of the change, right? What kind of change that can be expected in this transitional economies, right? So change of direction towards post Washington Consensus, right? So there are two things interlinked here: the direction of change and change of direction. So how states got changed, right, in direction of Washington Consensus, how states have modified themselves, how states got changed themselves to accept this Washington Consensus. There are two things. So we'll try to touch both these elements. So when we write the answer, we should give both the elements of change of direction and direction of change, right? Change in the nature of state, as well as change brought by this what you call LPG. Simply changes brought by LPG, right? Changes in the nature of state, right? So what kind of change that we see in the state, in its functioning as well as in its policy making. So we need to highlight these points, right? So this is one of the tricky question that is asked, right? So we need to balance all these elements, all right? So if we miss this, definitely our answer will get washed away. So how states, how the nations have implemented, what kind of measures are taken by the governments to implement this Washington Consensus, or simply what kind of measures that are taken by the government, right, to implement LPG, the change of direction towards what we call post Washington Consensus, right? So to implement Washington Consensus, what are the things done by the states, right? Simply if you take India, the 1991 reforms, 1991 reforms itself is a direction, change in the direction, right? Disinvestment policies, right? Privatization, right? Then what you call liberalizing, delicensing, deregulation, right? So decontrolling, right? Memorandum of understanding, right? So all these are different types of golden handshake policy, right? All these are the changes that we can see, right, in the direction towards post Washington Consensus. So we need to highlight this change, we need to highlight this. So we have a topic called as state versus market debate in development administration. So this question belongs to that chapter. So it is state versus markets, right? So what has been done after this what you call Washington Consensus? What kind of measures are taken by the state? So we need to highlight all these measures towards LPG simply, right? So right from 1991 reforms to what you call the present day disinvestment policy of the government, right? So this should be the crux of the answer. So let me discuss the entire flow of the answer once. So first of all, discuss what is Washington Consensus. Then, if it is possible, talk about the principles of Washington Consensus. Alright. Then, measures taken by transitional economies towards Washington Consensus. What is the impact of the change? Impact of change after Washington Consensus, that is both on the economic fronts as well as from the social welfare fronts, from the economic side as well as social welfare side. So simply we can also bring out the element of what you call exclusive growth. Not inclusive, it is exclusive. So one of the negative outcome of this what you call LPG is growth being driven by some sections or some sectors, but not by all. So most of the sections of society are being excluded from the growth process. So it is one of the outcome of this what you call post Washington Consensus, the impact of change. So and balance both state and, in conclusion, balance both state as well as markets. So this should be the crux of the answer. Alright. So first 3 points, majority of the answer should revolve around the first 3 points. 80% of the answer should be around these points. Alright. And even bring out this impact of change. Alright. So if it is done, then you can our answer is completed. Right. So this is about the question. Moving to the next question. Second, again a question on budgeting. Alright. So previously we have seen a question what you call, even in for 10 markers there was a question on outcome budget. Now again for 15 marks there was a question on budgeting. So let me read the question once. A sound budgeting system is a one which engenders trust among the citizens that the government is listening to their concerns. Elaborate this in the context of budgetary governance. Alright. So now there is one hint to start our answer. Alright. A sound budgeting system is one which engenders trust among the citizens. A budget that brings a trust within the citizens. A citizens trusting the government. A citizens feeling that the government is working for them. A citizens feel of a government of their own. Right. So citizens that the government is listening to their concerns. Now this is the word I am talking about. Right. The word of listening. Right. Listening rather than telling. Then serving rather than steering. So if we take these two words, these are the words which belongs to New Public Service, NPS. Right. So it is this NPS which has talked about what you call listening rather than telling. Alright, serving rather than steering. So NPM talked about steering, NPM talked about telling, NPS talked about listening and serving. Right. So now, if you can identify these, then our answer is over. Right. A sound budgeting system is the one which creates an impact, which creates a trust among the people. Right. Trust among the people about the government, that the government is working for them. So how people will come to know that the government is working for them? Both by its fiscal policy. Right. The fiscal policy. Second one, alright, the allocations made by the government to the welfare programs, the welfare programs designed the welfare programs that are being budgeted by the government, the amount of allocations to the welfare programs. It is from this, right, the people will come to know about the working of government, right? So first of all, define what is budget, right, importance of budget, right? So why it should be called as budgetary governance, so this need to be highlighted. Why it should be called as budgetary governance, right? So then how budget creates trust. So talk about the role of fiscal policy, right, the role of what do you call allocations made, the preferences shown in budget. See, if you remember previously in UPSC there were two times questions were asked about the role of budget as a socio-economic development. So budget as a tool for bringing socio-economic development. So this was the question asked previously in UPSC mains. Alright. So alright, our answer, there is no difference between the previous question asked and the present question. It is almost all same. Alright. So preferences given in budget. So budget as a tool of bringing socio-economic change. That is how this budget promotes equality. How this budget removes the gaps, the income gaps, right, within the society. So it is by highlighting these points we can say that budget is a one which what we call creates trust among the people. So it is by this we can say the importance of budget and budgetary governance. All right. So this is about the question. Moving to the next question. So next question is again on personal administration. So earlier question was asked on human resource development. Now the question directly is on training, right? So performance problems are rarely caused simply by lack of training, and rarely can performance be improved by training alone. That means question simply states that training alone is not a causing factor and training alone is not a remedy. That is what the question is. Alright. So there are two things here. Performance problems, role of training. Performance problems and role of training. So if we want to answer this question beautifully, we can use Taylor and we can also use Bernard. So Taylor has talked about what you call scientific recruitment, scientific training, right? So Taylor also talked about the what you call soldiering effect, the kind of soldiering effect that we can see in the organizations. Alright, so the role of incentives, the kind of incentive mechanism, that is piece rate system that was designed by Taylor. So we can use this what you call Taylor's principles of scientific management theory. Similarly, Bernard talked about the importance of incentives, contribution, satisfaction, equilibrium. So how this contribution depends upon from the side of what we call employees, right? The nature of moral, types of morals, how an organization will contribute to increased moral among the publics, among the employees. Alright. So if you are smart enough, we can use both Bernard and Taylor to answer this question. Right. So performance problems are rarely caused simply by lack of training, and rarely can be improved by training. Alright. So training, the question revolves around this Training is the main focal point of the question. Alright. So first of all, what is training? Define training. Right. So define training according to A.D. Gorwala. Define training according to Ashton Committee. So we have both Ashton Committee, then we have A.D. Gorwala, right, who has defined this training. So define training according to what we call Ashton Gorwala. So what kind of improvements can be made, right? Right. This should be the first part. Second part, right? Improvements that can be brought about by using this training. So what kind of improvements can be brought? But along with formal training, what are the other parameters that will determine, that will shape, right, the performance? So now bring the role of performance and training. What are different factors apart from this training that affects performance of the individuals? The organizational structuring of organization, the objectives of the organization. Say for example, the Bernard's concept of objectives, right? Coordination, cooperation, right? The kind of incentive mechanisms, the zone of indifference, alright, the kind of recruitment practices that are used, the kind of evaluation, different types of evaluation practices, alright, the what you call the superior subordinate relationships in terms of evaluation, the code of conduct. So all these are different factors that normally affect the performance of the individual, right? So training alone is not the factor that will affect the performance. So performance problems are not just because of training, or training alone will not remedy the what you call performance. So we need to focus even on other factors to improve the performance of the individuals, right? So our answer should focus on each and every element. So on recruitment, right, on assessment, that is on performance appraisal, the practice, what do you call the kind of mechanisms used in appraising the performance, in appraising the performances, the structure of the organization, the levels of hierarchy, right? So take 3 or 4 factors, analyze them and say that, right, apart from training, these are the factors that will affect the performance. So when you write this answer, do try to use the thinkers part also, right? So marks depends upon how you are using your subject, how you are using the thinkers. So this is where you can make a difference. Gaining 300 plus marks, you can score easily 330 marks, I'm sure, because, right, in my first 3 attempts I gave 6 mains with public administration. I never got less than 302. In my first attempt I got 302, and my 4th attempt onwards I started scoring more than 340 every time. The reason is how we what you call apply our theories, how we apply what you call different what you call chapters in the questions asked. So we should be very flexible in using our subject. When you do this, definitely will get the good marks. Right, so this is the what you call this is about the question on 7C. Let us move to the next question.